You're welcome back. This is NewsFile, it's your most authoritative news analysis platform. Now moving to the next subject matter. Let me read these messages. Edward Seyram says the AstraZeneca vaccine has an efficacy rate of 62%. Also, according to the BBC, it is disappointingly ineffective against the South African COVID variant. Well, we are told that we don't have the South African variant here, so we shouldn't have any problem. Nana Rules says, not pessimism, nor an antagonist to a breakthrough of such magnitude. But by and large, it's human lives we are talking about here. Ghana should not be used as a guinea pig in receipt of mere pittance. Okay, so then Baba, Chairman Tamale, says that I think a lot of sensitization has to be done to make sure we all go for and accept the jabs. If many people refuse to go for the vaccine, then the whole exercise would have been defeated. And then Kumi Eboa says, has our SDA independently authenticated? Of course, they have done so. So thank you for those views. TJ says, I strongly agree with our judges. As I strongly agree, our judges are not demigods. But what we need to remember is democracy without discipline is anarchy. Collins Gami says, from a common man and a citizen of the land, I feel the rule of contempt by the court, judiciary, needs a clear-cut way of definition that sits within the modern era. If not, soon, when captured by a dictatorial executive, okay, the meaning of democracy will be thrown to the dogs. Kofi Amwa says contempt. And I am right to ask if it's only the Whig men who can determine contempt. Parliament also has that power, you know. And if so, do they do it based on their direct discretion? If yes, then the matter goes beyond discussion to looks. I still don't trust the Ghanaian with discretionary power. All right, so thanks for sharing those views. Now, as you know, an LGBT advocacy office has just been shut down in Ghana, and a foreign mission made a publication about attending a party at that place, and that is what appears to have sparked all the brouhaha leading to the present circumstance. The Ghana Pentecostal Council, is it the secretary or so, has asked that those missions, persons within the missions who are found to have participated and encouraged that exercise should be found out and shown the exit out of this country. A number of comments have come from various places, including the Catholic Bishops' Conference. So let me begin with the Most Reverend Philip Name, President, Ghana Catholic Bishops' Conference and Metropolitan Archbishop of Tamale. In your statement that you issue, you say that whilst we must hate the sin, we should not hate the sinner. What sort of description is that? Okay. All right. Now, Ejapa, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. There are those who say the way in which the government proceeded to the place to shut down the office, there cannot be legal justification for it. What do you say?
But how can an attempt to stop an illegality be described as to have legal justification?
And by illegality, you mean what?
Look, this LGBTQI, I don't even know how many letters now constitute the acronym. It's in furtherance of a certain sexual preference of some people, which clearly includes unnatural carnal knowledge, which is abhorred by our law. The Criminal Offences Act is clear in that regard. And so, Samson, if people are acting in furtherance of an illegality, and that's what I mean by if an office is operating in furtherance of promotion of an illegality.
What does the Criminal Offences Act prohibit?
Unnatural carnal knowledge.
Yeah, and you are referring to section 104.
Samson,
yeah.
I'm leaving of the school.
Right.
That law in itself is limiting. And so we ought to expand it to cover all the spectrum of LGBT activities and make it illegal. Because as far as I'm concerned, this has nothing to do with human rights. The UN Declaration of Human Rights does not include sexual preference. That's what it is. And so if our law is against any sexual activity that is unnatural, but it does not cover the entire scope of activities that constitute unnatural sexual relations, then the law ought to be amended to capture all the gaps. How is
the office said to be engaged in what is prohibited by the law, as you refer to, unnatural carnal knowledge?
But isn't it obvious that the LGBTQI, please help me, because I'm confused. I saw a literature over the course of the week that even has LGBTQI something, a whole lot of things. What is their motive? That, look, we need to be able to be allowed to express our love, quote, in any manner that we want. That includes same-sex, correct? Same-sex is unnatural carnal knowledge, is it not? I need help.
So when we set up the Constitution Review Commission, it found out that Ghanaians are against it.
Absolutely.
But look at it here. Its conclusion. In its conclusion, it says that your law prohibits only one aspect of what may constitute LGBT activity.
The law to cover the entire gamut.
Right. So they said this was their recommendation. Recommendation for constitutional change. That is in page 657. They said the commission recommends that the legality or otherwise of homosexuality be decided by the Supreme Court.
Supreme Court, yes.
If the matter comes before the court.
That's right.
So if it was illegal, would they not have stated categorically in this book that it is illegal in Ghana? So what do you mean by they went to enforce the law against an illegality?
But of course, they didn't say that it was a legal activity either, did they? The Constitutional Review Commission did not say that homosexuality is a legal activity.
Okay.
Okay. And so I'm saying that as far as I'm concerned, the Criminal Offences Act is clear. Unless, of course, you can give me a contrary interpretation to the provisions of that act.
Almost all the minister designates who have appeared before Parliament and have been asked questions about this. Adjoa Safo more specifically, and the Chieftaincy Affairs Minister have all said Ghana law is against it. Are they correct?
Not entirely, but to an extent they are correct. I'm saying that our law is limiting because obviously the scope of and it keeps changing by the day. They keep adding all sorts of categorizations to their description. In the past, it was just homosexuality. Now it's gone to lesbians, gays, and whatnot. I'm saying that to the extent that they grow complex, our law ought to respond by inputting appropriate amendments to capture the entirety of the offensive act.
We have been saying this for almost a decade now, as far as I can remember. Professor Mills's administration encountered it, and he was very categorical in telling the West and whoever was minded to hear that it will not happen in this country, even if we have to go hungry and will not get their aid. Then John Mahama's administration faced a similar situation, unequivocal response. Akufo-Addo's administration, this will be, I think, the second or third time that it is coming up. And the first time, let me conclude and ask the question. The first time it came up, the president is reported to have made a comment that suggested an endorsement of sorts that this was bound to happen. What do you say about that?
No.
And why have we not changed the law all this while if we really meant to do that?
No, I agree. And that's the sad bit, that like many things in our country, when it comes up, we speak about it and don't proceed to its logical conclusion.
Okay.
And let it ride until it rears its head again. So I'm saying that to the extent that it has come to the fore again, and ministers designate have made categorical statements with respect to government position on it. Clearly, government reflects the aspirations of the people. Okay? You've heard the Catholic Bishops' Conference, you've heard all the religious organizations, you've heard the Islamic bloc all speaking in unison against the perpetration of the sexual preferences of people in this country. Because if we leave the floodgate, you never know which of
the state
included. So we need to act now.
The state is not governed by verbal pronouncements of the appointees.
Not a doubt at all, and I agree with you entirely. So I'm saying that like many things in our country, this should probably spare us and put a clear closure to this matter at this time. Because look, I hear people speak, and sometimes I wonder, I'm not going to be able to conceive of the thought of any of my kids coming to tell me that this is the practice that they are indulging.
Okay, thank you.
And
thank you. Now, Most Reverend Philip Name, thank you very much for joining us back, President of the Ghana Catholic Bishops' Conference. So from time to time, you have had to issue a statement. And this time around, the matter came up and you issued a statement again supporting the shutting down of the office, demanding to hear from the president his stance. What exactly do you want to hear from the president? And when your statement also says that these people are entitled to the same human rights that all of us enjoy and should be treated in that light, even though you say the practice they want to engage in, you don't see that as a human right. How do you marry the two? How do we treat them in the circumstance? Please unmute. Please unmute.
Pardon?
Great. We can hear you now. We can hear you now.
Okay. What I'm trying to say is the statement that we issued was first and foremost aimed at getting Catholics in the country to know clearly what the Catholic Church believes with regard to this phenomenon of lesbian, gay thing. And as well as inform all Ghanaians what we consider an acceptable behavior, especially when it comes to marriage. So that was our first aim. God, who created man and woman, he created a human person in sexual differentiation. That means man and woman. also had an intention how the two genders could complement one another. And so our first thing was saying that to have a man wanting to lie with another man and have sex is unacceptable to us as Catholics. And people who are engaged in this should know that they are engaging in something unacceptable, and in some respects also against our cultural tradition. So that was the first aim. But we also wanted to appeal to the Ghanaian populace that it is not because they are engaging in something we think morally unacceptable that they should be objects of discrimination by all against them. And that's why we said when the United Nations defined the human rights on 10 December 1948, this was still not a matter of concern. I mean, homosexuality was not a matter of concern. And those rights which were defined, about 30 of them, are rights which should also be accorded to the homosexuals. I had occasion to give examples to this. If you have a homosexual, that means a gay or lesbian, who has studied medicine and can use this skill to contribute effectively to the health of Ghanaians, he should not be discriminated against of practicing the medicine that he has learned, or engineering. If you want an engineer, civil engineer, to do a work to the benefit of the development of our country, it is not right to discriminate against some because the interviewing personnel happened to find out that this or the other one was gay or lesbian. That is the area that I would very much like Ghanaians to understand. You need to separate the humanity of a person from what he does, which is not acceptable. And if somebody is a human person created in the same image and likeness of God as all other humans are created, if he has an activity which is abhorrent, we need to clearly enforce that anytime he does this, he must stand before the law and be condemned for that abhorrent behavior. So if you ask me what we want the president to do, it comes into the first thing, to let all those, whether they are in school or they are finished school, who are in the practice of this abnormal sexual relationship, to further make it clear that this kind of behavior is against the laws of Ghana, is against the culture of Ghana. So this is the first thing that we would like the president to address. And also, I think that this is very, very much against, is flourishing in a context where unemployment, especially of the youth, if a lot of our youth finish university and they cannot be absorbed in the working order, it makes Ghana a fertile ground for the lobbyists of this LGBT who come in with a lot of money to lure our vibrant youth into these abhorrent activities.
What do you say?
And if they come and
what do you say, Most Reverend? What do you say? What do you say to those who say that?
Second thing.
What do you say to those who say that you must limit, quote unquote, your preaching to the church or to the people of the Christian faith, because there are others who don't share the same faith, and therefore foisting your beliefs on them might not be accurate or might be problematic? What do you say about that?
Well, what I say is that, for example, we have been running schools and hospitals for the benefit of all Ghanaians. There are certain issues where we believe that as a church, we have a contribution to make towards the development of the whole country. And I think it should be known to you as a media person that when we build schools, we don't recruit only Catholics to benefit from our school system. We take everybody. If we are running hospitals, we don't say only those who are Christians or Catholics should benefit from our hospitals. So if there's a behavior pattern which we think can do harm to all manner of Ghanaians, we need to come out and say this is not acceptable by God. It's not acceptable by even the Ghanaian culture. And therefore, it is a matter of concern to all Ghanaians.
All right, thank you.
So I think that.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Just hold it on there for me. And in the light of your statement, you actually sought to also, as it were, correct some wrong impressions that people have held about what the Pope Francis has said some time ago. And you said that the intrinsic dignity of each person must always be respected in word, in action, and in law. Homosexuals must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. According to Pope Francis, the homosexual person needs to be, quote, respected in his or her dignity and treated with consideration, and every sign of unjust discrimination is to be carefully avoided, particularly any form of aggression or violence, unquote. Families with LGBT members need respectful pastoral guidance from the church and its pastors so that gays and lesbians can fully carry out God's will in their lives. Nonetheless, according to the church's understanding of human rights, the rights of homosexuals as persons do not include the right of a man to marry a man or of a woman to marry a woman. For the church, this is morally wrong and goes against God's purpose for marriage. We should also point out that the European Court for Human Rights has ruled that same-sex marriages are not considered as human rights, making it clear that homosexual partnerships do not in fact equal marriages between a man and a woman. The ruling was announced 9th June 2016 in the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, France. Now, Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, having listened to Most Reverend Philip Name and also Ejapa Mensah, what will be your comments in respect of the human rights perspective about what the state has done, is seeking to do, and is being urged to do?
Thank you again, Samson. This is a highly emotive issue. I'm aware of that. And of course, the constituency that is under scrutiny here is, of course, not a very popular, not a popular target in our society, and it's not a popular target, in fact, in most societies that I know. So it is important, however, that in a conversation like this, certain, in order to keep it to keep it in the proper perspective and to keep it civil, we should lay down certain basic principles. This is a democracy to the extent that we vote to choose our leaders based on majority rule. And, majority rule has a certain danger to it. That, philosophers and statesmen have long been aware of, which is the possibility that it could lead to the tyranny of the majority. The tyranny of the majority expresses itself in many different ways. But in all cases, it's usually a certain vulnerable minority that is targeted for mistreatment, targeted for marginalization, targeted for, all kinds of deprivations. It's important to understand that, so there is a clear risk. That is why, even in democracies, constitutional democracies that is, oftentimes there are limitations, almost always, on what even the majority can do, acting through the state. And the state, because they know that the state usually acts at the behest of the majority, so there are strictures on what it is that is acceptable for a state to do to the minorities, right? And of course, minorities can come in all shapes and forms. They could be just immigrants. I have been an immigrant in a society, lived as an immigrant in a place before. Ghanaians are immigrants in many other places, South Africa and places. You could be a religious minority. You could be a person with disability. That makes you a minority in many places. And all of these different categories of minorities are, depending on the society, may be vulnerable to the tyranny of the majority. So we should be very careful walking down a path where you single out a particular group and say, you don't belong, you're not like us in every respect, and therefore we will target you for particular disabilities, for particular mistreatment, for particular deprivation, and the like. That is one of the things that I think we should make very clear here. When the states, normally, the states is where the minorities would go for protection, right? In circumstances where they are at risk, they would normally appeal to the state for protection. But when that state, rather than protect the minorities, allows itself and its power to be deployed and co-opted by that same majority to further marginalize, victimize the minority, right? Then it becomes even more dangerous. The situation becomes even more desperate, even more dire. And we should be very clear what we are talking about here. It's easy for this conversation to get out of its clear boundaries and get into all manner of things. What we are talking about here, nobody is making a case for legalization of gay marriage, right? That is not, you can make all kinds of assumptions that, if we allow this, we'll go to the next, there's a plus there, we don't know where the plus, fine. The issue on the table, what we are faced with now, what has brought this debate about, is a simple matter of freedom of association. Is it permissible for certain persons to associate with each other and, as an association, have a meeting place called an LGBT office? When Ejapa was speaking, he made an interesting point. What he said he was doing is essentially advocacy for law reform. He was advocating a change in our criminal laws to reach certain behaviors. That is entirely his right. Is Ejapa then saying that if you have another group of persons who think that those criminal laws target them unfairly or are extremely punitive, they may not, like he has done, they may not band together to form whatever, an NGO, whatever, to advocate better legal treatment. What the office is doing, I mean, people can make assumptions about the office. Nobody is even, I mean, and I think the Most Reverend also made an important point about what the person, who a person is, separating who a person is from what a person does. The law on the books in Ghana, we must be very clear what it does. Even in its most liberal interpretation, the law on the books in Ghana criminalizes a particular sexual act. Interestingly, that sexual act is, it could be gender neutral. It could actually be sexual orientation neutral. There is nothing in the definition of unnatural carnal knowledge that even excludes heterosexuals from actually running afoul of that law. That is the law on the book. It criminalizes a particular sexual act. If a person is not engaged in the act, and there is no evidence that that person has engaged in that act, to then move from that to say, if you have this inclination, predisposition, however you call it, proclivity, inclination, just because you have it, whether or not you actually act on it is a separate matter. Whether you've acted on it or you act on it, just because you have identified yourself as this person who may have this predisposition, we move from the criminal law criminalizing that act to then look at you as a person and say, hey, but you too, it's almost like you have now criminalized the person. You may not associate. You may not associate even to advocate a change in the law to make your condition more humane, right? So that is the point of departure here, that what we have done is essentially saying, if you are a homosexual, if you are an LGBT person, right? If you are homosexual, you may not associate, even if it's for the purpose of maybe meeting, sharing your experiences, giving each other company because you are socially isolated here. Nobody, people, see you in a certain way. So if you form your own group to basically just give each other solidarity, whatever. And if you also want at some point to say, look, we also want to advocate the same way Japan did. We want to advocate on the other side, that instead of expanding the law to make it even harsher, that we think that the law, and this is just criminal law. Remember that criminal laws are repealable.
Right.
It's not even constitutions can be amended.
Okay.
So essentially what the Japan is saying is that he can advocate, right, that the law be reformed to make it harsher, but people who fall under that law may not get together and advocate that the law be made less harsh.
Two very quick questions.
What we're talking about, it's not about gay marriage.
Two very quick questions and quick responses to them for me, Prof. We have just been reading about someone convicted for polygamy somewhere abroad, you call it so, in the UK or somewhere like that.
Sure.
Right. Will someone be permitted to set up an office to advocate for polygamy in these countries which are at the forefront of promoting LGBT rights?
Oh, absolutely. There are many, actually. There are actually many, African communities, many immigrant communities abroad and other places where polygamy is prohibited who advocate, right? So that is the exact point we're saying. This person was convicted under a law that prohibits polygamy, right? This person is not being convicted for banding together with other people who share his preference to advocate for a change in the polygamy law or to do any other thing. I mean,
Right.
say, you know, a group of people who just need to discuss the problems of polygamy.
And the reference I wanted to make was to Germany. The next question is, and very quick response to that, can't our government invoke public policy considerations and on the basis of cultural and general public aversion, as we have seen, to stop this office as it has done?
It will be difficult for me to see how that works. If the purposes of the office, right, it's clear, if the purpose of the office is to offer a space for people who feel victimized by, you know, social exclusion or whatever, to be able to meet and to be able to share their experiences, you know, to be able to see, you know, find a way out of the social misery that they are in. And it also includes, unless we're saying that the criminal law is sacrosanct. Remember that we're not here, the argument here is not theological. There are certain things theologically that remain a sin, remains a sin, remains a sin, remains a sin, right? That's a theological concept. In law, you have crime. We don't have sins.
All right.
Law,
okay,
right?
thank you. Thank you. Hold it there for me briefly. And now, Joyce, we have been talking about this over and again. It comes up, it goes. And there are actually people who hold the view that this is all part of the strategy of the financiers, that it should come up as often as possible, then we talk about it, and then we'll get to acceptance and so on and so forth. Anytime it comes, we are clear we don't need it in this country. Why is it that all this while we keep talking, but we don't put in the policies clearly, and we don't put in the legislation that we keep talking about to end the debate, so that somebody does not even come to talk about it in your place?
Well, Samson, I think that all the other speakers have basically advocated for exactly the same reaction. I think it's time for us to stop paying lip service to this matter. It is time for the executive, time for our legislators, and time for all the key stakeholders to come together and find a way to put this matter to sleep. I think the only way is necessarily to find a way either through public policy, through legislation, through enactments, whatever. In any case, most of these legislations that we speak to are not cast in iron. Even our Constitution grants us all sorts of freedoms on the basis of religion, creed, gender, and what have you. You understand? So that definitely has a certain wide connotation or ambit. If the Criminal Offences Act in particular limits it to a natural carnal knowledge, we cannot necessarily enter the minds of the framers of that particular portion of the legislation and find out why they arrived at this conclusion. I think certainly it is time for us to end the debate and put it to rest. We do have sympathies, of course. We all empathize with what is going on. But of course, we do know also that it has a certain cultural and, legal connotation that probably does not necessarily engender for certain activities or actions for that matter. In fact, I'm yet to hear that there's been any arrest, for example, or prosecution of anybody in that category of LGBTQ, etc. You understand? Pretty much like in terms of prosecution, for example.
Some people have been arrested.
Yes, but you know that at some point there was even the whole debate about their rights and all of that, if you remember. You know, so it's been going on for quite some time. It forced Professor Mills to make his position known. It put the same pressure on John Dramani Mahama at some point. I believe that President Akufo-Addo tried very hard, the human rights lawyer that he is, to stay within a certain middle, argument. But certainly, it will not rest the matters as we have them. There is enormous pressure. There's advocacy. There's a certain mindset to that is gradually emerging. I think that government needs to find a way to encapsulate all of these sentiments and find the best way that, as Prof said, to work to protect certain minority groups as we have it. But sometimes even there are times when you even interpret the Criminal Offences Act as being at variance even with the constitutional provision on human rights, etc. I am a bit constrained to say what government should or should not do. But I believe that we can continue to have this debate for as long as possible. It will not bring us any conclusions for that matter. So certainly beyond politics, beyond the social ramifications, and beyond even the human rights issues. I think that it's time for us to...
As a lawyer, you must be very familiar with the provisions of the Constitution that we as lawyers are just too familiar with.
All the time.
And I am referring to... I want to just read small bit of this provision as regards the hierarchy of our laws in Article 11.
Good.
Customary laws are part of the laws of this country.
Yes.
So is it not clear that there's no custom in Ghana that recognizes this kind of thing? Exactly. And therefore, we actually don't have a lacuna.
Yeah. You see, I think that there may be no gray areas, for example, or there may be no lacuna as you indicate. But there is also that aspect that seeks to criminalize unnatural carnal knowledge. How it is defined, what we can define as such, you and I both do not know. There is still a certain conversation going on. The same cultures, the same religious bodies that this aspect of the Constitution seeks to embolden or to seek justification for also have issues with this particular aspect of it. Should we continue to legislate? Should we just allow things to stand? Should we continue even to give the impressions that there is a certain criminality that this act leads to? Should they be free also to associate, as Prof has just said? You know, something is actually a very complex conversation. But I think it is time for us to put an end to this debate. There must be a certain final pronouncement on the matter.
Okay.
And then we can take the conversation from there.
I'm sorry, Professor H.K.C. Prempeh, Andrew Ejapa Mensah, Joyce Bar Muktari, Most Reverend Philip Name. Thank you all so very much for your time. Time will not allow us to go beyond this point. Just one message I wanted to read out from Angela Jamnabwaje. Says that there's a need for calm and non-violence on the issue, but we must all be aware that this has gone beyond some adults in our own space doing their own thing, for which no one should even bother. It is now that we should recognize and accept it in our laws, policies, teach it in our schools, and let children decide if they want to be who they want to be today or tomorrow. Neither he nor she, the third day or a day, and both he and she the fourth day. People want us to accept that they are transgender, transabled, transhuman, transage. All these are part of the advocacy of those pushing that we should accept this. And if we don't, you are queerphobic or homophobic, no matter how gentle you try to advance your views. No, it is wrong. Yeah, it is wrong. And it is wrong to abuse, lynch, insult those who identify themselves as such. But to say we should accept all this, no. All right. This has been NewsFile, brought to you by Bank of Africa, strong as a group and close as a partner, MTN, Ashesi University, Heaven Mosquito Spray and Coil, and Upper Foods, DBS Industries, Robert and Sons. I'm Samson Ladi Anyanini. Thank you very much. We'll see you again next week with another edition of NewsFile.